Hello, I'm Andrew, and welcome to the next installment in my Sicilian Dragon Masterclass series. Today we're going to be taking a look at some of White's sixth move alternatives that they can play. Just to remind you how we reach the Dragon Sicilian starting position, White plays e4, we play c5, now knight f3, the open Sicilian, d6, d4, c takes on d4, knight takes on d4, knight f6, knight c3, and now g6. If you're unfamiliar with how we've reached this position, again, you need to go and take a look at the introductory video in this series. From this position, we have now covered all of White's critical lines, but I would like to address some alternative bishop moves that they can play here that aren't very common, but are worth knowing about and being a little bit prepared for. They are bishop to b5 check, bishop to d3, and bishop to g5. Now, these bishop to g5 and bishop to b5 check lines, it's worth knowing, can sometimes transpose into one another. But let's start with bishop to d3. The first thing you should notice here, aside from the fact this is not the most active square for our opponent's bishop, is that it disconnects the queen from the protection of this knight on d4, which is why I'm recommending knight to c6 here, where White now has three options. They are to capture the knight, allowing us to recapture, and as is the case in a lot of these lines that we've already looked at, whenever White allows us to recapture here, they're just strengthening our center. So we would just develop very normally bishop to g7, something like bishop to e3, and we could castle here and be very fine. If bishop to g5, we're going to castle here, and if h3, we're also going to castle here and just be solid. There's not really much that our opponent can do in this line that's very dangerous. So what else do they have at their disposal? Knight to f3. Well, now we can play bishop to g7, and after a move like h3, stopping our pieces from jumping in here, preventing our bishop from developing, pinning their knight, maybe forcing their bishop to come back. They want to play this h3 move, but now castles, and we can strike in the center with d5 immediately. Whenever we have the opportunity to strike with d5, and we have enough here to recapture after all the trades, more often than not, we're just doing better. So I've included this continuation of knight takes, pawn takes, now queen takes. The queen, if it would like to come off the back rank and allow its rooks to stack behind it, would need to come to e2, because d2 here, queen d2 would be a blunder, because in this position we have bishop takes on h3, removing the defender of the knight and picking up the knight. So if the queen wants to come off the back rank, it would need to come to e2, but that gives us time to develop our bishop to f5, looking to trade pieces here. If they decide not to, instead playing bishop to c4, attacking our queen, we have two options: either queen into e4, where we will likely get a queen trade and just be very good here with two very strong bishops. Notice the pressure already on c2. Or we could play queen to d6, and after the rook swings to the open d file, we could then tuck the queen into c7 and have a great game from this position. So we don't really need to worry too much about the knight hopping back either. We would just look to develop very normally and then break in the center with d5. Our opponent would be spending too many tempi moving that knight around. So what do they have left? They have bishop to e3, but now notice h3 has not been played. The bishop looks up for grabs. We should be hopping our knight here in order to threaten this bishop. And now if it retreats, of course the knight would be hanging, so they must capture our knight on c6 now. And then once we recapture and it retreats, we don't need to move the knight just yet because it is protected by the bishop, so we can look to develop. And after our opponent brings their bishop back to add more pressure or plays a move like f3, now we want to retreat the knight to e5. f4 would probably be a little bit too weakening here since our opponent is not yet castled. We would maybe have queen to b6 ideas, even preventing our opponent from castling. Bishop to e3 wouldn't work there because of course the pawn would be advanced, so that would just be a free piece. So therefore our opponent is likely to just castle, and now I've included two continuations here. One is just to castle as well, but you can even break with f5 already, and if captures we take back with the bishop, and if they push f4 again, this is a little bit too weakening. We now have checks along this diagonal incoming. we're about to castle. The knight can come to c5 very comfortably, maybe sometimes even to f6. We're just doing very well. So this is the sample continuation I've included where black would just fare fantastically. So this line bishop to d3, there's not really much to remember. If you see it, hop your knight into c6. If they capture, you are better. If they play bishop to e3, attack that piece. And finally, if they retreat the knight to f3, just use your time advantage for a central break and you will be absolutely fine. Okay, so the next move to take a look at is bishop to b5 check. Now you don't want to be interposing with the knight here because after captures, we've seen this tactic a bunch of times. Our opponent picks up the exchange as well as the pawn. So this would not be good for us. So you must interpose with the knight or the bishop. Both are playable, but I am recommending the simpler option, which is just to interpose with the bishop and offer a trade of pieces. If they don't trade, fine, we will develop the knight, develop the bishop, castle, and just be very solid here. Alternatively, if they do take the piece, we can take back with the queen. So if you forget and take back with the queen, this is fine. But I am recommending taking back with the knight because from this position, the knight would like to hop into e5, sometimes c5, sometimes even b6. e5 and b6 looking to maybe eventually hop into the c4 square in some lines. So our opponent could develop their bishop, and now we just develop our bishop and castles. They bring the rook to the center, we bring our rook to the c-file. These are all typical ideas that you should by now be able to find on your own. If they hop the knight in the center, then once these pieces have cleared off, look how our queen can come to b6, threatening this pawn. Yes, we appear to be hanging a pawn here, but just watch what happens if our opponent grabs this. This pawn is poisoned. We're attacking the knight twice. Our knight is looking to hop into e5. Our knight is looking to hop into c5. So now c3 to reinforce the knight. Now we can defend the pawn, and you might be thinking, but it is still attacked twice. However, if they capture with the bishop, we can now block their rook's line of sight with bishop to e5. And if f4, why now we can capture the bishop and then recapture the pawn, and all is fine here. We just have a slightly more active position than our opponent. And similarly, if in this position they take with the rook, now we take the rook, and once they recapture, we can actually just grab the pawn on b7 now, attacking this pawn twice, and then this knight will be very unstable. So yeah, we're actually just we're crushing in a position like this. So this pawn is a poison pawn that they should not be looking to grab. Now, you are likely to transpose into this if they don't play bishop to g5 and just castle. You know, they could play bishop to g5 here and you would transpose, but if they play something like bishop to e3, well, now we can just castle. And if something like, let's say, queen to d2, we can go after that bishop again. If the bishop comes to f4, do not make the mistake of playing the forking e5. Just retreat the knight back to f6. Now e5 is a real threat. They will drop this piece back and we can hop our knight into e5. So why is this such a mistake, this forking e5? It's because they can play the intermezzo bishop to g5, now attacking our queen. And you might think, well, hang on a minute, takes, and then takes, and then takes, threatening the queen. I may be getting three pieces here, right? I'm going to get, because then they're going to take back with b takes on c3, not queen takes on c3 because of our bishop, and then I'll be winning 1, 2, 3 pieces for the queen. Maybe that's good for me. Well, that is actually good for you. That is a very playable position. But here, white should not play b takes on c3, allowing you 3 pieces for the queen, which is still very playable for black. They should play the sneaky move, queen to f4, hitting your knight now. So if you grab here, looking to win another pawn and attack the rook, once the rook moves over, you might be able to grab the bishop, but then you will be losing the knight. So here, yeah, white is just crushing. So do not play this e5 fork. Just remember knight back to f6 and everything would be fine there. If something like rook to e1, we can see similar ideas in the air of knight to e5, knight to c5 and knight to b6. These e5 and b6 ideas have the idea of hopping the knight in eventually to c4 that can be very dangerous. Let's just have a look at one sample continuation. Knight to e5. f4 would be a little bit of a mistake here because now we can hop the knight into c4, which is what it came for in the first place. Now attacking the bishop, attacking the tender pawn here. If the bishop wants to retreat, look who now has all of the attacking initiative, attacking this knight now, attacking this square twice. We can very easily be attacking this knight a third time once this knight moves out the way. This is just not very good for white. Even if they try and throw in this knight move, we could just move our queen out of danger and bring the rook to the c file, and we just have enormous pressure mounting. Yeah, this is great for black. We are just dictating the entire flow of the game there. So if something like knight to f3, again, I like this move, knight to c4, attacking the bishop, attacking the weak pawn. If the bishop goes back, then again, we're just taking the c file. All of white's pieces are retreating to the back rank, and we have all of the initiative. And if they defend with the rook here, then we can snap off, of course, one of their best pieces and just be very, very happy. All that to say, bishop to b5 check shouldn't be very challenging after we look to trade here. And if they retreat the bishop back, then we're just getting a very equal game where you should be able to synthesize all kinds of ideas from previous lines that we have been looking at to your advantage, and you'll find that you end up with similar positions where you're just a tempo up, which would be grand. Therefore, just remembering if they capture to recapture with the knight, develop and utilize these squares for your knight, and if queen to d2, this is just a very nice tactic, but you must remember not to play this fork, to retreat the knight. The fork is now in the air, and plant the other knight here now in its place. Notice now with f4, you're forking both these pieces, you will be winning your opponent's dark squared bishop, which would be tremendous. Okay, so let's now go back to the only other line, which is bishop to g5. Here we just look to develop. If bishop to b5 check, we interpose now like this. If back, we're in a very similar position. If trades, we're in a very similar position. So this should all be very familiar to you and not much of a problem. Okay, so if instead of that, they decide to play, I don't know, something like queen to d2, now threatening your dark squared bishop, you can actually go ahead and kick this piece immediately. If they capture here, we're very good like this. We've removed one of their strongest pieces. The knight will flow to c6. The bishop will come out to e6 most likely, or d7. And if they decide to hop the knight into d5, now you can just tuck the bishop back into g7. So if they decide instead to retreat the bishop, then that's fine, but now these pieces are not forming a battery on this diagonal. So just develop as normal, castle, and bring your bishop to e6, rook to c8. This is all very typical stuff. And when the time is right, the knight is retreating to d7 to exploit what squares. You should know this by now. And remember, if it comes to e5 or if it comes to b6, these two pieces are working together to contest c4. You might look to trade off for your opponent's light squared bishop there and just be very good. So let's say in this position they play bishop to c4. Now we just castle, and after castles we might even be transposing into some of the bishop to c4 lines, develop the knight. If captures here, we're absolutely fantastic. If the rook comes to the center, we can play this lovely move, queen to a5, attacking the bishop. f4 would be a horrendous mistake here. Why? Because now we have queen to c5 check, forking the king and the bishop, so we will be up a piece. Therefore, they must play something like queen to d2. Now the move rook to e8. It would be very easy in this position to go, all right, there's an open file here that I want to exploit. Let's play rook to b8. However, this fails to the tactic knight d5. The queens now see each other, so we must do something about this. Okay, so I grab this queen. However, this doesn't come with check, and although this knight is hanging, our opponent has time enough to play Knight takes on e7 check, and now after we move, they can reclaim our queen. So their knight is in a very annoying position. They have won a pawn, and they are threatening to win our bishop. We don't want to fall for that if we can avoid it. Therefore, I'm recommending the move rook to e8. This now prevents this tactic because, of course, our opponent would not have time to play this. We would just grab the knight, and now after something like h3, we can play the very natural looking rook to b8 and rotate that knight back so that it can come to, you've guessed it, all of these key squares. Notice the pressure that is now mounting on c3. I think we just have a very good game here, and if our opponent plays bishop to h6, you don't even need to allow this trade because you have already moved the rook to the e file, so there is no discovered attack on your own rook here. Your opponent's not winning an exchange. This piece now just looks a bit silly, and from here you can enjoy a very good game. You don't need to worry about this pressure because this would, of course, take care of everything. Just don't be short-sighted in this line. If they play this move, remember it is a blunder because you can take with the queen. Sometimes it is easy to neglect the long-range view of our queens on the edge of the board like this. If you were to take like this, you would be hanging the pawn, stepping the king over, and losing the game in, considerably ugly fashion. So don't allow your opponent to exploit you like that. I mean, it's probably much easier just to plant the knight in on e5. That covers all of the sixth move alternatives that I wanted to take a look at. Of course, in any of the lines we have explored, there are a number of moves that white can play that it would be impossible for me to cover. But once you start to synthesize all of the ideas from the various different lines, you will start to observe commonalities, things that crop up again and again and again. And using your understanding of the key ideas in each main variation, which is far more important to absorb than just memorizing the moves as a sequence of moves. Once you do that, you will be a very competent Sicilian dragon player. I wish you the best of luck against e4 with this new opening. In subsequent episodes, I will be looking at some model games. These will likely be master games, but I might also include some amateur games because we can learn a lot from how people mishandle their openings. After that, there will be 2 bonus chapters looking at the accelerated dragon and the hyper accelerated dragon. I hope you've enjoyed the video and found the content useful. Please like, comment, subscribe, share. All of that stuff really helps give my channel exposure. And if you would like to make a donation to the channel, you can do so via the PayPal link in the description. As always, take care, and I will see you in the next one.